Hi, everyone. Welcome to another virtual program presented by the Katharine Hepburn Cultural Arts Center. My name is Robin Andrioli. I'm the Director of Development and Community Relations here. We are thrilled to have this program for you, and it was made possible through a grant by Connecticut Humanities, and we thank them so much for their support, not only of these virtual programs, but also the virtual exhibit of the Katharine Hepburn Museum. Tonight, I'm thrilled to have our friend Stephen Gencarella with us, and he's going to present this fabulous program, Katharine Hepburn, Legend, Heroine, and Yankee Eccentric. I'm having difficulty with that word, Stephen. Thank you for choosing it. But I hope you really enjoy tonight's presentation. I am going to be moving through some slides that we have put together. So photos of Kate and her family will be popping up along with some of the letters in our collection here. We encourage you to ask questions using the live chat box on YouTube. You can just type your question in and we'll do our best to get to all of them at the end of the program. Stephen Olbrys Gencarella is a professor of folklore at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He was the resident folklorist for the Connecticut River Museum in Essex, Connecticut from 2014 to 2019. In 2018, he published Wicked, Weird, and Wily Yankees, a celebration of New England's eccentric and misfits with Globe Pequot Press. In 2019, he published a hiking guide to the folkloric sites of Connecticut with Falcon Guides. A companion book to the folkloric sites of Massachusetts will be released in September 2021. He's a member of the board of directors for the Connecticut Eastern Regional Tourism District and has been a visiting professor at the Lyme Academy of Fine Arts. Stephen grew up in Westerly, Rhode Island, and is now a resident of Lyme, Connecticut, where he lives with his beautiful wife, 4 children, 4 dogs, and countless wild animals who visit the pond at their home. Welcome, and thank you, Stephen. You can take it away.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Hello, everyone. Thank you. So before I begin, permit me to express how profoundly honored I am to speak on the topic of Katharine Hepburn, particularly here at the Kate. This building has lived a remarkable life since it first opened, since it was dedicated as a space for the performing arts in May 1911, the realization of tireless efforts by the artistic community that was known as the Old Saybrook Musical and Dramatic Club. I'd like to take a moment to thank my dear friend, Robin Andrioli, for this wonderful opportunity. I'd also like to take a moment to express my gratitude for and deep appreciation for the executive director of the Kate, Brett Elliott, the board of trustees, the entire staff and volunteers, the visionaries who made the Kate possible, Connecticut Humanities for supporting this program with a grant, and all of you for watching and for your continued support of this unique cultural institution here at the mouth of the Connecticut River. And above all, I would like to thank Ms. Hepburn for the same reasons I suspect that we would all like to thank her. As Robin noted, I'm a professor of folklore studies, and that is precisely what it sounds like. I have the good fortune of spending my day studying myths and legends, folk tales, ballads, rituals, and other forms of traditional artistic expression. And I also have the additional great fortune to live in the town of Lyme, just across the Connecticut River from Old Saybrook. You may be asking yourself, what does a professor of folklore studies have to say about one of the most influential actresses of the 20th century? I've been asking myself the same question for a few months. But let's remember that Ms. Hepburn herself admired folklore enough to record 6 folk tales for a wonderful collection, hard to find, unfortunately, a wonderful collection called The World of Stories in the early 1980s. One of them, The Musicians of Bremen, was a favorite of hers as a child. And so I hope that as a folklorist, I'll be able to speak to issues of what we're doing when we try to figure out who Katharine Hepburn was and what she meant and still means to our world and to our culture. So today I'm going to ask the question, what can we learn from stories by and about Katharine Hepburn about how to live a good life? To answer that question, I'm going to consider Katharine Hepburn as a legend, a heroine, and a Yankee eccentric. Now, if any of those terms make you raise an eyebrow, just be patient. In relying upon them, my aim is to reveal Ms. Hepburn's continued influence in contemporary culture and how the wisdom she embodied speaks to us still today. in thinking about Ms. Hepburn's contributions from a folklorist's perspective, I hope to shed some new insights, provoke some new conversations about material that may be very well known to many of you. And believe me, please believe me, when I say that I am very well aware that Ms. Hepburn often suggested that in a public performance, there were the polar opposites of being fascinating and being a bore. And I will do my best to be as far away from being a bore as possible. In the time I have, I'd like us to consider each of those traditional figures, that is a legend, a heroine, and a Yankee eccentric, both as Katharine Hepburn was asked to perform those roles by others, and how, in many cases, whether she accepted or rejected those roles. Now, folklorists are desperately interested in the words of others and the words that others share, so my primary sources here is Ms. Hepburn herself, in her own words and her own stories, including her autobiography, Me, various interviews, and letters in the collection here at the Kate, for which I have Robin Andreoli to thank for reviewing and excerpting in just a magisterial way. Each of those ideas, legend, heroine, Yankee eccentric, could occupy a talk of its own, and I have a surprise, there's a fourth one coming. But I'm just going to present a judiciously brief sense of each one to start rather than to close the conversation. We can always dive in more deeply in Q&A. Okay, so let's start with this idea of Katharine Hepburn as a legend. And by legend, I don't mean legendary, as in a legendary actress. Of course, she was that. I mean that Katharine Hepburn as a character in folklore, in stories that are fantastical, but perhaps based on a kernel of historical fact, and that speak to the values, the anxieties, and certainly the joys of storytellers and audiences that share them. Allow me to give you an example of a legend from the area here near the Cape. In 2014, I had the honor of being the resident folklorist for the Connecticut River Museum in Essex, Connecticut, a town adjacent to Old Saybrook. The building that now houses that museum began its life as a warehouse in the 1800s, and like the Cape, has metamorphosed over the decades. In the 1950s, it was the upper deck dining room and cocktail restaurant. And when I began to research the folklore of that building itself, one intriguing story came up time and time and time again, namely that someone saw Katharine Hepburn dining there. Truth be told, I didn't think much of it at the time, but then I heard that story told so often and by so many different people that if it were true that she was spotted there as often people said she was, I think I could break some news today. Because the only explanation for such frequent sightings of Ms. Hepburn must have been that she had a second job as the maitre d' of the upper deck dining room and cocktail restaurant. It's a funny story. It's a funny piece of local lore, but that Katharine Hepburn dined here, that's a tale, it's a legend that's right along the lines of George Washington slept here. And of course, the people who told me that tale, who shared that with me, were never the people who actually saw Ms. Hepburn herself. It was always someone's mother's aunt's friend. Regretfully, I didn't record those tales at the time. I just didn't know enough about the area that has now become my home to realize that seeing Katharine Hepburn was an essential and very important genre of storytelling to express local pride. Now, of course, many, many stories of encounters with are true. The Kate has collected some wonderful examples, as have thoughtful journalists like Ann Nyberg. But that folkloric tale concerns something more, I think, than just a brush with celebrity. As a legend, it speaks to the very experience that we humans long for in telling stories, an awareness of a rich sense of place and of belonging, and of finding the extraordinary in the ordinary moments of life. So it's no surprise to me that Katharine Hepburn is the right folk heroine for such a legend, because she herself invoked, and I think embodied, those same ideals as a storyteller herself. These legends about Katharine Hepburn they are fascinating. I was once told a tale about her driving with reckless abandon to visit the actor Henry Hull over in Lyme. And the story I heard echoes, but it differs from the one she tells in her autobiography, Me. There's another story, currently in circulation, believe it or not, about her father giving up money for a poorer family to purchase circus tickets. I won't share them now, but perhaps we'll have time to revisit them in the Q&A. They're a delight indeed. But I'd be remiss not to mention a legend that has recently returned with a vengeance. The gist of it is that Katharine Hepburn was chased out of a house by a ghost when she lived in Beverly Hills. It's a compelling tale built on the most flimsiest of rumors. In the 1930s, several newspapers and fan magazines reported that Katharine Hepburn had lived or was living in a haunted house, a house that just happened to become the home of Boris Karloff after she moved away. Over the time, that tale, as it was passed on in the oral tradition, morphed into a story that Ms. Hepburn had been chased away from the house by a ghost. Now, it's true. Ms. Hepburn did live in a house in Coldwater Canyon in the 1930s that Boris Karloff later purchased. And it's also true that she mentioned a ghostly presence in that home. She does so in passing in Me, admitting that she and her then roommate, Laura Harding, thought the house was haunted and that her visiting brother Richard felt an uncanny something watching over him. We even have evidence of it in a letter in the collection here at the Cape. In the missive to her mother, dated July 8th, 1933, she writes about that house, quote, "The swimming pool is divine and the tennis court a great success. Laura has acquired a white police dog puppy, which will arrive tomorrow. Ghosty, our ghost, which Dick may have told you of, has been very quiet of late, so we have been getting better sleep." But here's the thing. Ms. Hepburn also described that house as fun and certainly did not flee in any sense of the word. She and Laura Harding did move to another house, but it was only in 1934. So what's going on with these stories of her being afraid of a ghost and chased away? We can debate the range of possibilities for why they were and are continued to be told. And I'd like to offer one reason, one possibility that speaks to Ms. Hepburn herself, namely her reputation for fearlessness in action, even as she readily admitted that she was often petrified to act. After all, if the fearless Katharine Hepburn ran away from a haunted house, what chance do we mere mortals have there? It's a great story. It makes for a good story, even if not a single word of it is true. And that's the spirit of a legend in folklore. Now, if we juxtapose those folkloric narratives about Katharine Hepburn with the reactions she had herself to being called a legend, something very fascinating happens. When journalists would ask her about being a legend, whether the technical term from folklore or its meaning in everyday parlance, she responded with her characteristic perspicacity, a genuine sense of humility, and it was met with a desire to be free from fear. Her exchange with Morley Safer in 1979 is illustrative of her tendency in the face of self-doubt. Safer says to her, quote, "You're a legend to so many people, I guess just about everyone, because you do not give much of yourself publicly beyond the films." Smiling, Ms. Hepburn replies or asks, "You mean this is stupid of me to do this?" Safer laughs, says, "I don't know, but do you feel like a legend?" To which she replies, "No, I don't think anyone feels like anything really. You know, I always thought they were out to get me and that I'd better be good. And I still think I better be good. I struggle to do my best." To Barbara Walters in 1981, she politely halted any attribution of awe ascribed to her, noting that, quote, "I know myself pretty goddamn well, and I couldn't, except with laughter, think of myself as a legend," unquote. But perhaps the best example of her implacable spiritedness came in the form of a quip unleashed in 1973. It was in that memorable interview with Dick Cavett. He raised the topic that, quote, "There's a legend about you that you can sleep when other people can't." "Yes," she concurred. "What is the secret of that?" Cabot inquired, expecting a response detailing a technique for resting. And without missing a beat, Ms. Hepburn replied, clear conscience. Her comment, its perfect delivery and its abiding wisdom brought down the house and summoned an admiring smile from Cabot. And a half century later, it remains the perfect moral to the story Katharine Hepburn made of her life. Okay, so legends are populated by heroic figures. So let's now consider Katharine Hepburn's relationship to the idea of a heroine. There's no doubt that Katharine Hepburn became a folk heroine in the sense that nearly 2 decades after her death, people are still continuing to tell stories about her. And just like that word legend, there's a technical and an everyday meaning of hero and heroine. In today's way of speaking, right, the hero usually means a protagonist of a dramatic work, the person the audience root for, especially against the villain. They're characters. Heroes and heroines are characters in that sense, like the Western heroes that Ms. Hepburn herself praises in Me that populated some of her favorite films as a child. And it's in that sense which, in speaking about the timelessness of her films, she said to Dick Cavett, this is a direct quote, I think the type of story we did then is different. We were doing hero stories and heroine stories. Now we're doing the deeply troubled sex life stories of most of us, and I find this a bit dull. It's a beautiful insight into the way that not only Hollywood was changing, but perhaps the culture was changing as well. In the classical sense, the hero or the heroine is a figure who embodies the dilemma of morality. A well-composed heroic figure is not one-dimensional then, but caught between the vices and the virtues of a society. The tragic hero is almost always consumed by those vices, of course, and especially arrogance. I think it's telling. I think it's important. I think we should admire how often Ms. Hepburn strove to play heroines who were not simple in their nature, even if that meant not having constant financial success or the praise of celebrity. Whether in Shakespeare or whether in screwball comedies, she relished the challenge to play complicated heroines and therefore to bring to life characters that could speak to ethical concerns that arise from living in the world, our having to live meaningfully, and our having to get along with others. If you listen to her speak about the roles that she played, she consistently reveals a keen sensibility of the ways that heroes and heroines reflect, speak to, and even shape the culture at a specific historical time. Take, for example, her comments that she and Spencer Tracy represented the perfect American couple on film in the 1940s and in the 1950s, and certainly in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. She made that point often and usually did not elaborate because no one thought to ask her to do so. But in an interview with Clive James, she provided a glimpse of the majesty of her insights on the cultural role of heroines and heroes. She says in that interview that she and Tracy played, quote, the perfect male and the perfect female of that era, American style. The woman coming into her own and the man trying to blockade her, unquote. It's brilliant. And look, it's not solely upholding the idea of a universal heroine. It's a profound awareness that our concepts of heroines and heroes can change over time and can influence our times as well. Of course, inevitably, journalists would pivot from that penetrating observation to try to get Ms. Hepburn to say something about her relationship with Tracy. And then subsequently, we're introduced to Ms. Hepburn's honed refusal to speak about it. And I certainly understand why interviewers went down that road that they did. But as a folklorist, I lament that not enough people thought to ask her to comment on the roles that she was playing and how she understood those heroines. Katharine Hepburn had so much to say about the art of playing complex heroines had we only paid closer attention to her. In real life, as with legend, Katharine Hepburn politely rejected being called a heroine or a role model. I marvel how often she suggested, with an impish smile at that actors should not be considered heroes. She'd often pass along Spencer Tracy's witticism that no one should forget it was an actor who killed Lincoln. But it's equally true that she herself readily identified her own heroes, especially her parents, whose heroism she defined as centering on and caring for others. Her mother as an activist for women's rights, and her father as a doctor. So if we wish to live a heroic life by the standards that Katharine Hepburn admired, we should pay very close attention to what she says about where the energy of our efforts should be most expended. Ms. Hepburn is very clear in her statements in which she rejects the notion of an afterlife, or in her comments on the conscience and the natural sense of right and wrong, that for her, the essence of heroic behavior off screen in real life was the dedication to help others in the here and now and to treat with dignity those who are before us. I admire, and I suspect many of you do as well, that she had the courage to be brutally honest with herself. We must improve ourselves, she said. It's a direct quote. She insisted that to Dick Cavett and in numerous ways in numerous other interviews. And it was clear that to improve oneself, she meant that we must self-interrogate how we treat others. I would venture to guess from all the evidence that I can see that for Ms. Hepburn, a finely tuned moral compass was the mark of genuine heroic behavior where it matters most in our relationship to each other. And I think because she always sought to improve her being an ethical person, attuned to what we can do while we're alive, that she could claim, as she often did, to live a happy life, despite, indeed, the tremendous losses she faced and the uphill climb as a woman in a man's world. We now arrive at the idea of an eccentric. And let me reverse the pattern that I've been following and note upfront that Katharine Hepburn resisted that designation for herself. She did recognize certain people or things as eccentric. In me, it was the hat that she wore getting off the train in California. And she once offered that Howard Hughes' vain refusal to accept his being deaf in one ear led him to becoming eccentric. She further identified many things as odd or oddball, ranging from the shape of Luddy's nose to the aforementioned house in Coldwater Canyon, to John Barrymore's attitudes towards success, to her entire and perhaps infamous interview with Phil Donahue. But she outright refused the term for herself, once responding to Leonard Maltin's inquiry about whether she considered herself to be a woman ahead of her time by saying, quote, "I never thought about it. I always thought you were supposed to be in charge of your own life and ahead of the times. I had a mother and a father who were way ahead of their times. It never occurred to me that I was being eccentric in any way," unquote. All right, so let me be clear. I believe Ms. Hepburn, and in asking us to consider her as an eccentric, I mean it in the technical sense found in folklore. Eccentricity is originally a term from astronomy. Initially, it meant a planetary body that was out of orbit. By the late 1800s, the term could be applied to people who were, shall we say, in their own orbit, fouling their own orbit. New England has been, and still is, populated with eccentrics, and we see that impulse in the regional folklore and other storytelling about people who live here. Indeed, Benjamin Botkin, the preeminent folklorist of the 20th century, once observed that, and this is a quote, "In its insistence on the sacred right of the individual to be a character, New England may have bred eccentrics rather than heroes." So by employing the term eccentric here, I mean it only as the highest honor that a person could have bestowed upon them, someone who follows their own orbit. There are countless examples in which Ms. Hepburn asserted that independence and determination and what it meant for her notion of living the good life. In the interest of time, I'll hold off on them for now, other than to share a profoundly elegant one in which she substituted a maritime image for the typical celestial images. It was in an interview with Diane Sawyer that she revealed words that she often said to herself. Quote, "You're paddling your own canoe. If you stop paddling, you're not going to get anywhere." It's a striking sentiment, and it's made all the more so the way the quote ends, namely that if you stop paddling, the tide is going to take you and the waves are going to sink you. Well, there it is, the pull of the tides, the gravitational force of a planet. The eccentric is well aware of the naturalness of the world to hold us back, but they resist that call to conventionality and live in a determined fashion. I think Ms. Hepburn expressed that attitude best in that peculiar interview with Donahue. When pressed to defend her atheism, she effortlessly shifted the conversation to a more important notion of living for the here rather than for the hereafter. And she remarked with unflappable sagacity that not only are there too many people afraid to die, but there are far too many who are afraid to live. And that insight into the human animal is precisely what the psychologist David Weeks calls the gift of eccentrics. And it's a wisdom awaiting us if we're willing to listen. Consider the gift, for example, that lies awaiting us in an undated letter here at the Cape, likely composed in 1932. To put that in perspective, that's when Ms. Hepburn was about the age of 25. In it, she reveals her distaste of Hollywood. She's decisive, but she's not derisive, and reveals an astute sensibility of what is necessary for the good life. She says, "Thank your lucky stars that you live in the East. Mon Dieu, these cities and people. Frightfully nice, but none of the graceful superficialities which make life charming." Pause on that. The graceful superficialities that make life charming. How could one not smile in the face of that revealing discernment about what matters? It's remarkable indeed. Now, that qualifier of Yankee to eccentric is a significant one. It's an important one. And for the first time in this talk, I'm on firm ground, for I can say that Katharine Hepburn did indeed accept that term. It appears in a delightful story in Me, for example, in which Ms. Hepburn relishes a win with the most delicious sense of justice. In 1930, while in New York, a young Ms. Hepburn was chosen for a part in Art and Mrs. Bottle, a comedy about an independent woman by the British playwright Ben Levy. Jane Cowell was the star, but Levy found Hepburn unattractive. Can you imagine? And so she was fired, depriving her of the $125 she was to be paid for the part. As Hepburn recounts of being let go in Me, quote, "I thought they were stupid and would rue the day." Well, they did. And a week later, they called me back. I said they would have to pay me $150 instead of $125, as they had hurt my dignity. I was traveling on pretty safe ground because I knew that everyone liked me but Levy, and they were running short on time. And they had tried all the available girls in town. So they gave me the $150, a bit shocked by my Yankee trading. But for those of you who don't catch the reference or the reason for her gleeful victory, the Yankee spirit is a traditional attitude and way of life characteristic of New England and New Englanders. Think of Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Call. The distinguished folklorist Tristram Coffin once described the Yankee figure as, quote, "characterized by hard work, common sense, thrift, steadiness, know-how, and handiness." Ben Bodkin added that the Yankee was sensible, self-dependent, freedom-loving, stubborn, practical, thrifty, industrious, inventive, and acquisitive. The Yankee fosters an attitude towards life epitomized by self-reliance. Oh, and above all, the Yankee is witty and shows a wit that says much in little, took its time to give an answer, was often dry, and loved incongruity. Does that sound like someone we all admire? I won't abuse your patience, but trust me when I say that there are far too many examples in which Ms. Hepburn uses the same and related terms to describe herself. When Barbara Walters once asked her what she admired most about herself, for example, she replied that she had common sense. That was the same interview, incidentally, in which she said that she enjoyed living a Spartan lifestyle. But Robin Andrioli and I have been marveling for weeks at another gem that gives some depth to that claim and its revelation of the Yankee perspective that undergirds it. It's from a letter dated October 1936. Ms. Hepburn writes, "It is now 6:30 Sunday, and I have just come up to my room with an enormous plate of lima beans and a huge glass of milk, and I am about to go to sleep. A very exciting concert is playing on the radio. There goes a terrific burst of applause, and someone is saying that tomorrow Columbus discovered America. Lima beans, a huge glass of milk, and a good night's sleep. If that does not capture the frugality and pragmatism of the Yankee spirit, then nothing in the annals of storytelling could do so." And I raise the issue of the Yankee Eccentric, not only to remind all of us that we should never forget Katharine Hepburn's deep Connecticut roots, but also to celebrate that in folklore, the Yankee Eccentric is often a person who, because they're possessed of a roguish intelligence and clear-sightedness, could outwit Satan himself. And although I think few things in life are certain, I am certain whom I would put my money on in any contest between Katharine Hepburn and the devil. As I bring this talk to a close, I'd like to offer one final idea from folklore studies that may speak to Katharine Hepburn's legacy. I didn't include it on the title of the talk so that I could leave you with a pleasant surprise. I'd like you to consider Katharine Hepburn as a comic genius. Now, as with the other terms that I've employed, I ask your patience for the use of the word comic. I mean nothing jejune or ludicrous by that. Comic genius is a beautiful term, and it's one that stitches together the most inspiring aspects of legend and heroine and Yankee eccentric. And I think we see Katharine Hepburn's comic genius in two places. First, it erupts in her actual comedic performances. I know the stories of her having to seek additional training for bringing a baby and other humorous films, but all comedic actors, all great comedic actors, and all artists for that matter, require patience and practice. So I would still argue that Katharine Hepburn is one of the most underappreciated comic geniuses of 20th century film. In addition to her wit and the keen observational skills that she brought to acting, consider her physical prowess in the comedic films and plays. She's someone who so well understood her own body and its limitations that she could manipulate it with ease. Indeed, if you were to show me as someone who studies the history of comedy, images of her pratfalls and the fluidity of her movements alone, I would have guessed that not only had she trained in commedia dell'arte, but was a master of it. And that achievement alone was a natural ability of hers. Add to that expressive movement her command of her voice, whether the staccato and rapid fire, the comedies with Cary Grant, the impeccable timing opposite the comedies with Spencer Tracy, or even the playfulness of the Russian accent opposite Bob Hope in The Iron Petticoat. And you have a recipe for a perfect tension between freedom and control. And that's the very impetus that animates any comedy that liberates the soul. Then take the self-ironizing and good-humored nature of her essentially playing herself in a film like Grace Quigley or Laura Lansing's Slept Here. And finally, mix in her own comments on comedy and humor that are peppered through all of her interviews, how she loathed, for example, the ways in which vulgarity had replaced humor and wit. And I cannot believe that more critics and scholars and people in general did not, and perhaps still do not, see her as a comic genius. But let us never forget her summary of great comics that she offers in her autobiography. To make people laugh. What a joy that is. I suspect that one reason people did not quite see her comic brilliance was because they were often too busy trying to make her out as a tragic character. And this brings me to the second, more important sense of comic, namely as the opposite of tragic, as in someone who upholds a comic attitude towards life, a refusal to allow the sense of the tragic to dominate existence and the days that we have here. Do yourself a favor. Take out a green pen and underline every time in me that Ms. Hepburn uses the words laughter, humor, and comic or comedic. Then take a red pen and underline each case of crying, humorless, and tragic. Be prepared to see more than twice the amount of green to red. That's true even if you include a juxtaposition of happy to sad and funny to serious. And if you're looking for advice from Katharine Hepburn about how to live the good life, I think we found it. Aim for a life in which the comic appears more than twice as often as the tragic. And remember, both of them are how we perceive things and respond to them, not in the events themselves. One hears that joyful sense of the comic in her advice to Clive James that the secret to life is how you survive failure, a recognition that failure will happen, but that it will not beat you. It manifests in her recollection of her mother's outlook on life. This is a direct quote. Don't give in. Fight for your future. Independence is the only solution. Women are as good as men. Onward. You don't have too much money, but you do have independent spirits. Knowledge, education. Don't give in. Make your own trail. Don't moan. Don't complain. Think positively. It appears again in a loving letter she included in her autobiography from her father, given to her at age 21, in which he advised that she not take life too seriously. And it permeates the letter she wrote to Spencer Tracy after he died. Don't overlook that she took the time in that letter to recall his great love of comics, those who make us laugh, those who provide us with equipment for living. And it echoes repeatedly in her answer to what attracted her to him in the first place: his sense of humor, his being funny, his being an enchanting storyteller who could make people laugh and forget their sorrows. And it erupts and shines irrepressible in the photographs of Ms. Hepburn smiling from the bathtubs that survived the devastating hurricane of 1938 that destroyed her home just down the road here in Fenwick. It is that radiant image that I'd like to conclude upon, a perfect example of the comic spirit that Katharine Hepburn radiated and gifted to our world. So we've reached the end of the talk. I hope I was not a bore speaking about the life of such a fascinating woman. Was Katharine Hepburn a legend? Perhaps. A heroine? Perhaps. A Yankee eccentric? Perhaps. A comic genius? Of that I have no doubt. And I think it is especially true where it matters most, in our everyday lives and in our relationship to self and to others. To make people laugh. What a joy that is. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your continued support of the Kate. And thank you, Ms. Hepburn, for your joyful wisdom, which deserves to live on in stories until there are no more tales to be told.
Thank you, Steve. I love listening to you talk and the way that you've analyzed and broken down these three facets of Katharine Hepburn. We have some really interesting comments I wanted to share. Our friend Beth, who is such an amazing source of information when it comes to Katharine Hepburn, she's viewing and agrees we should all use KH's words and rely on her own words to tell her story, and how fascinating she is. We agree. Gail Schrimmer, and this is really fun. I remember seeing her riding her bike on the causeway here in Old Saybrook as the images age throughout the decades. My memory has her dressed in full-on African queen garb.
Oh,
so
my.
That certainly lends itself to folklore. And we do have some photos of Kate riding her bike. We'll try to grab some at some point. Our friend Kat Kramer out in California. Kat is the daughter of Stanley Kramer, who directed Kate and Spence in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Thanks so much for viewing, Kat. And of course, she is named after Katharine Hepburn, and Katharine Hepburn is her godmother. We're so happy that she's joining. Another comment from Eric, love learning the root of the word eccentric. And now I've learned how to say it much more clearly than eccentric. It's easier that way. And they're all having fun exchanging lots of pleasantries. It's really wonderful. Thank you for watching, everyone. They're thanking us. It's so thrilling to have people joining us. I wanted to comment on one thing you talked about earlier, where she was always kind of wondering if she was going to be good, right? And she did worry about that a lot. At least that's the vantage point I see when I'm reading through her letters that we have here in our collection, where she often says, especially to her father, I need to make sure I can deliver the goods.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can deliver the goods. It's one of her favorite phrases, right? So she's always looking at, the box office returns on movies. She's doing the math for her dad in a letter about how much she expects to get from certain movies. But of course, will that actually materialize? She doubts it. She doesn't trust the studios all that much. But there is that sense of, will I be good enough, and will I get the next job? And these are all, things that are happening in the 30s, in the early part of her career, until that big turning point with the Philadelphia story. But it's such an amazing way to really get inside Kate's head. We're so fortunate that we have these letters that were gifted to us from her family. And we hope to share more of them. We've had some in our virtual exhibit, which is still on our YouTube channel here. And as we continue completion of the renovation of the Katharine Hepburn Museum, we'll have more of them to share with everybody. I don't know if you had other comments that you wanted to mention.
Well, I think too, they are remarkable. Again, it's I just want to thank, first of all, I want to thank everyone who wrote in, everyone who listened. Again, I cannot be more honored by this opportunity. Again, Robin, I owe you a debt of gratitude to you, but to everybody who listened in and everyone who shares those stories. There are, Kate, are there stories, Robin, the Kate stories that you have, are they still available online for folks? Because it's just a wonderful opportunity to read. Some of them are stories of what happened here at the Kate, right? But many of them are stories of just simple encounters with Katharine Hepburn. To see her at Cumberland Farms or waiting in line with her, and or the bicycle stories from there. They're so remarkable to me. Again, some of this is as a folklorist, but also just as a human being. They're so striking. They're so touching. They speak to her spirit, the generosity of her spirit. And I think also what I love about those letters and what I love about people sharing those stories is it shows that, even in dark times, that we have an interconnectedness. And she summoned that. She summons that from us. She summons the best of us. I've been a professor for 20 years. I've never prepared anything with, such trepidation beforehand, because I want to do right for her, because I know she was always trying to do right by herself. And we need more people who we can admire in that way. I think what's remarkable about her, as you said when we started, is not that she did not treat herself as spectacular as celebrity. She expresses those doubts routinely, and there's something very comforting to see in such a great performer, that trepidation to the end. It's beautiful.
That's where so many of the stories go as well. We had asked people to share Kate stories when we were turning 10. This goes back to 2019. As the Kate turned 10, people were sharing stories not only of being at the Kate and enjoying a program here, but also what the building was prior to it being the Kate. So maybe someone came and got their marriage license here when it was town hall in the town clerk's office. But a lot of people wrote to us about their Katharine Hepburn stories. And we really do appreciate hearing them. It's often, they were shopping at Waltz, or maybe they were walking with their family down the street and she went flying by in her car with her chauffeur. A lot of stories about when she had that car accident on the causeway.
Yeah.
And stories about when she helped the town to purchase a new fire truck. And I don't think this took place while she was still alive, but they eventually did get a small license plate that said Kate that they had affixed to the truck. And it probably didn't happen when she was here, because I don't think she would have approved of that. And we've heard, many times over that she never wanted something named after her while she was living.
Yep.
But certainly we spoke to her family before the Katharine Hepburn Cultural Arts Center came to be with that name. So,
Right.
and we're thrilled that our museum is going to be bigger than it was before. We're expanding, and we're going to have many more programs like this, both we hope in person, as well as continuing to share them online with everybody.
Right. Absolutely. Robin, is it folklore, or is it true that you may actually have access to the bathtub that survived the 38 hurricane?
It's true. This is a very small, close-knit town, and there was a member of the family of one of the town residents who was, I believe, working for the town at the time of the hurricane in 1938 and helping with the cleanup. And so that bathtub was held on to by a family who may loan it to us for the next iteration of the museum. We're thrilled about that. We also think we may have located one of her bicycles, which would be really fun. So a lot of neat things are being added to the collection.
Yeah. Oh, that is wonderful. I think too that speaks again to the beauty of that sense of community that comes through, and that again she very much inspired. When I look again as a folklorist at the stories that people are sharing about her, whether they're funnier ones, again, like the delight that someone took who did not see her drive supposedly from Old Saybrook to Lyme to go and read lines with Henry Hull, but for those of you who do not know the area, Lyme has windy kinds of roads.
Yeah.
And so to zip around them, right, to suggest that she was flying around them was to underscore the recklessness of it, but in a kind of funny, comedic way. And I love that even in those humorous ones, or those ones where there's a sense of kind of daring and independence, there's still a delightful connection to an overall sense of community, both the actual community, right? And so that people, say in the small town of Lyme, would laugh and say, well, I could see her doing it, and it's very dangerous to be going along those lines. And then also summoning that sense of, because she was a consummate storyteller herself, and you see it in me, you see it in the way that she's always in interviews, she tells stories in the interviews, and some of them, that, and I don't just mean that she has a narrative that goes from point A to point B. I mean, you can see that the thing that she praised in Spencer Tracy the most, his ability to tell stories, to hold people captivated. Well, I find the same thing is that I'll watch an hour-long interview with her, and time just flies by because she knows how to tell a good tale. I think it's something she learned from her parents. I think it's something that she learned astutely watching some of the best actors and actresses of her time. And when you're telling stories in that way that are meaningful, you're enacting a sense of community, right? You're bringing people together, not just as an audience to a performance, but also as a sense of sharing something. And so I just think that is, again, what is remarkable, and what will remain remarkable about her is how much she really shared what she gifted to this world, and never asked for, necessarily for recognition for those types of gifts.
Mm-hmm. She didn't look for recognition for many reasons. And I know her brother Robert had spoken in interviews and talked about her philanthropy. Mm-hmm. So for her, it was very private, and it was not something that she did because she wanted everyone to say, oh, look how wonderful Katharine Hepburn is in helping this cause or that cause. She did it very quietly, and it was mostly because she learned about people who had a need, not necessarily big organizations, and she wanted to help them personally. And so for that, that holds a very special place for us, because she was so philanthropic, and people didn't make a big deal about it. So many people don't know about it, mm-hmm. But she really was concerned about helping people improve their lives, which is the mantra from her parents, right? That right. They were concerned with the betterment of the position of men and women, exactly. The way that she puts it in her autobiography, which is exactly. Quite wordy, but she really lived that. I think all of her siblings did. Everyone in some way contributed to their communities, and certainly were very generous people. as well.
Where I see that so many times, there's a certain, again, like a good storyteller, she has a repertoire. And so in virtually all of the interviews where they try to ask her, I mean, just a loving, admiring question, kind of asking her about her greatness, she will say it's luck. And she said, and often it's luck that I was born to parents. She goes back to her parents. She goes back to those models of a heroism, and articulates it time and time again. And even when people try to give her the in to brag about herself, again, what I love about it, and again, you and I know, here living in New England, in some ways it's so Yankee to not, to have the pride of not taking, I don't want to say not to have the pride of not taking pride. I don't mean it that way. I'm saying to have the pride of an independence and an interrogation of self, to want to be better, so that one doesn't just simply rest on one's laurels, right?
Right.
Often she said, no, it's not me. It's my parents. It's the values that they instilled. And what are those values? Those values, as you just beautifully and eloquently said, are of giving to others, are of that sense of responding to. That would be real heroism. Yeah. And in a funny way, that's kind of what I'm saying, is that makes her an eccentric in the best sense of the word, is that in a world that can often be very ugly, it's very easy to forget what is most important. She just reminds us of it all the time. It's a gift. It's the gift of that kind of Yankee eccentricity. And to be clear, we can dispense with all of those terms. It's the gift that Katharine Hepburn gives us, is to remind us of the importance of that type of relationship to others from there.
Someone is commenting on the YouTube chat about asking favorite movies.
Well,
I have one. My favorite movie is Holiday. I just love
really. Yeah. Oh, wow. I'm not surprised, but what is?
Well, because I think it's funny and it's romantic, and I'm glad she gets him in the end. She gets the guy, but she's such a dramatic character in that, It's like she's the drama queen of the family almost.
Yeah, she's brilliant. Oh, it's such a good question. I mean, again, I'm going to beg in answering this. I beg forgiveness, because I really want to know what the person who asked the question, of course, I want to know their answer.
What their favorite is.
Their favorite. That's what really matters to me. I would say, when my professor had on, and again, and trying to argue that she really does need to be thought of as a comic genius. If I limit not all of the films, but just limit, say, to the comedy. Obviously, if we take Guess Who's Coming to Dinner as a comedy, and it's a comedy in the ancient sense, in that love wins out at the end. The character, what you want to happen for the characters happens. It's restorative. It derives from the what we call new comedy, and that is often about domestic affairs and marriage. And usually there's a young couple who are being blocked by a father figure. This goes right back to the ancient Greeks, right? And then there's a way for them to reconcile with the family ultimately. It's historically probably the most important of the comedies in that sense, because of how it influenced and changed the conversation, the national conversation. I think in a similar way, Adam's Rib would be, kind of, I think, an important, if I were going to choose a more traditional comedy than Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, right? I would say Adam's Rib could be arguably the most important of the 12, 15 films that she makes. Because it is so important to that moment of women coming into their own in American society, of the resistance. The beauty of the language between the two of them was rehearsed in homes throughout America in that time. But I have to confess, my personal favorite, and it's arguably a little cliche, Bringing Up Baby it's brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant. My wife and I watched it a couple of days ago, and I don't know how many times we've seen it, and we're still peeling with laughter. It's so brilliant. I try to figure out why I like it so much. And, obviously, Grant he's brilliant in it. He's wonderful. I love the I love again the screwball nature of it, right? It harkens back to old comedy, right? This kind of ridiculous, kind of cosmic sensibility of is everything going to fall apart, or is it all going to be put together? But her charm, her brilliance, I said it in the talk, the staccato firing of her speech. She's so good at it. She's so brilliant. And I just love the tale itself. And I know it's kind of cliche, but I think that it is, it's a brilliant film. I think obviously all our films are brilliant. I guess if I had to choose one just to watch for the rest of my life, it would be Bringing Up Baby. I love that you love Holiday, though. That's so great.
I love Holiday. I don't have to watch it at the holidays. I can watch it anytime. I love some of the comments. Of course, Kat Kramer reminding us that Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is a social issue comedy. Certainly had some pushback at the time that it was released. In fact, Kat and her mother just did a recent discussion about this around the film. And Beth tells us Adam's Rib is her favorite.
Love it.
Etta loves all of the Cary Grant films. They were so much fun. Each one was comedically unique. True. Bringing Up Baby, another vote. And someone just reminding us what's also very interesting aspect, I think, is her image, because she was very aware of that, or image in general.
Yeah.
And yes. And we have explored that in another virtual lecture that we had, our virtual discussion about how she was so carefully planning really every moment of how she looked and how she was presented. And not only, her physical image, but people that she associated with even. That was something that she really thought about. She went to some parties. She liked George Pukori, was a very good friend. She went to parties at his home, but she was fine not to go to other parties. And there's one, when she's out in Hollywood, there's a letter we have where she's writing to Mother talking about she and her friend Laura. And she says that, we invite people to sit with us for lunch when we're on set at the studio, and we get just enough information from the conversation and they get just enough information from us so that it feels like, we're all socializing. But she doesn't necessarily socialize in the sense of going to big red carpet events. And, we all know that she didn't go to the Oscars. And then in one other letter, she says something like, everyone, out here thinks I'm such a wit, which tells you all you need to know about the social life in Hollywood. She doesn't feel like she's, a part of it really. And people think she's fabulous. And it's just funny. It's just funny. So Philadelphia Story, of course, that's another great one.
Yeah. I mean, and again, you could Stanley Cavell, the philosopher, wrote The Pursuit of Happiness. It was a book in which I think 3, maybe 4 of her films appear as an important understanding of what he calls comedies of remarriage. And I think he might even coined the term, right? But he argues that their social importance is because this is a transitional period in which not only is American society changing and its understanding, its relationship to women and to women in the workplace, to women's roles, breaking domestic traditions and expectations, but that also our notion of love was changing, right? That we could find people not specifically to improve our social status or to improve our financial outlook, but that love was becoming something that we could explore as a meaningful way to connect with other people. And I think, I mentioned this because certainly with works like the Philadelphia Story, Woman of the Year, to a certain degree, all of them. I even like Pat and Mike. That idea of what is love and what could love be. Today, it may seem so simple that, of course, you go out and find the person that you want to be with. Sometimes, maybe 2 or 3 times, you find that person that you want to be with. But that agency, that freedom, and that really genuine sense of loving is not something that we may take it for granted now, but it was something that's hard fought for. And I think the comedies, it's I think what's so important about them, the comedies of Katharine Hepburn really did help rehearse that idea, introduce that idea, make that idea be acceptable, and provoke some fights about it. And so I completely agree with the comment of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner being a social comedy. I think we could almost make the issue that all of them were about social issues and social themes, even when they weren't framed necessarily that way. Again, it's just a remarkable contribution, and I hope we pay more attention to her and give her the credit she deserves as in comedy and as a comic genius.
We'll have to delve into more of this. We'll do another talk at some point. And we haven't even begun to talk about all of her relationships. That's definitely another virtual lecture. But we've reached our hour, and we thank everyone for watching. It's really been so much fun to hear Steve's analysis of this. And as he's been putting together, he shared ideas with me, and I was able to share some, new known facts with him regarding some of the things that came out in the letters we have. So it's been a thrill. It's always fun to talk about Kate. As our friend Beth is reminding us on the YouTube chat, watch all of her movies. They're all unique and bring something to the table. Even the ones that maybe weren't such a big hit, like Sylvia Scarlett, which I have watched.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but think of how Sylvia Scarlett would read today and think of the importance of it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the first comedy too. Well, we must stop, I know, but no, it's a brilliant. Beth is absolutely 100% right. We must go and watch all of her movies again, and that is a good way to spend our days.
Almost look at them through a different lens. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you tuning in, and we hope to see you soon with another program about the great Kate. Take care.